Hi everybody, my name's Amelia and welcome to the channel. And I do mean channel, by the way, because we're going to be talking about channeling today. Now, before we begin, I just wanted to say the reason I want to talk about channeling is because I have been watching a ton of channelers recently. I've been listening to their messages, and I myself am a channel. I know I mentioned part of it in my spiritual awakening video, which you guys can check out if you're interested, but honestly, it's been a very interesting journey for the past year. And so I decided to make a video just kind of talking about channeling in general, not so much centered on me, but just on like the history of channeling and such. So go ahead and grab yourself like a nice warm coffee. I love coffee, not tea, but I know people like tea, but I like coffee more. But go ahead and grab yourself a nice warm beverage, sit down, relax, and let's just go ahead and start talking about channeling in the spiritual community. Okay, so what is channeling? I have a definition up here. It is from askangels.com. I don't know, I just like this particular definition, but it says, channeling involves establishing a connection or communication with beings or sources in the spirit world, residing beyond our ordinary perception of physical reality. During a channeling, the channeler typically enters into a focused or altered state of consciousness, often referred to as a meditative or trance-like state. That definition there, it encompasses what channeling is. I mean, it's essentially where you, the channel, enter a meditative state or a trance-like state, and you are sort of like the medium between a higher consciousness or higher frequency and reality. Of course, when you start talking about channeling, you start ending up with conversations on the nature of reality, and you have to ask yourself, what are these higher states? What are these higher frequencies? And I do have a couple discussions on my TikTok as well as just here on YouTube about my personal opinions on like the state of consciousness and reality. In fact, my Consciousness is Fundamental video is probably one you should look at if you are confused as to how channeling could even be possible. To expand a bit more on what channeling is, because it kind of differs slightly from person to person. As in, some people believe that they are channeling like entities, and other people channel higher messages, but not really an entity. It's just like a thought form that develops in their mind that they translate as the channel. So some people say that channeling is like the voice that you hear when you are in a deep meditation. You can also have it through automatic writing, so when you're writing, people can channel that way. I recently watched an episode, or a podcast episode, on Third Eye Drops, where he was talking to one of his interviewees about this, and that person mentioned automatic writing. Other people say that channeling can also happen in the flow state, so if you are doing something that you love, and you get into that sense of flow, and you start to be able to do things that you wouldn't normally be able to do. So like when you start achieving amazing feats and you just kind of really get into that deep flow, people call that channeling as well. So like when you're in the zone, right? So that's like the basics of what channeling is. And again, the reason I brought this up is because I have been a channel for almost a year now, and I didn't expect it. I actually didn't even believe in channeling. Funny enough, I had seen channels in the spiritual community and I was like, that's baloney, that's not real. And apparently it is, because I don't know, it's happening to me. So anyway, this has put me on like an entirely like crazy spiritual journey. Like I have been launched full force into studying more spirituality and religion. This is stuff that I used to study, and then obviously you guys know I've been doing tarot for a while and I'm a tarot reader, but I'm not gonna lie, I kind of fell off of studying spirituality, studying mythos and religion. I really separated myself from the space for some reason. Like, yeah, I was doing tarot, yeah, I was showing you guys decks, and obviously you guys have seen that I've taken quite a few breaks from YouTube due to more like personal life things, but I think I just got really sucked into physical reality and forgot that I'm really passionate about religion and spirituality and myth and, you know, philosophy. So I got pulled back into it when channeling became a very real thing in my reality, and I didn't believe in it, and here we are, right? For me, channeling is entering a deep meditative state and channeling a higher entity or a higher frequency. How old is channeling, though? Honestly, it is extremely old. We have so many stories about people being oracles in the past, both in ancient Egypt, we have it in ancient Greece, like with the Oracle of Delphi. Like there are people who talk about oracles who channel entities. Even like if we go back to Plotinus in ancient Greece, he talks about the nous and how that comes forward, and there's speculation that a lot of philosophers were channeling higher entities in some sense of the word. We also have a lot of shamans and other spiritual leaders around the world who talk about channeling. Ayahuasca is a really big one where people, like shamans, will take ayahuasca and then they are able to divine messages and, you know, share channeled information, even if the word channeling isn't necessarily used. So it's been a thing that's kind of been around forever, and different cultures view it differently, but it's essentially the same thing. A lot of people also attributed this spiritual phenomena to like deities or of worship in their locations. So for example, like if you're channeling an entity, you might call it a certain deity or give it a certain name to reflect the culture that you're in. And again, the act of channeling could also be called mediumship or other things because it's very dependent upon your location and what's going on with you. Now, there was an explosion of spirituality in the late 19th century, so we're talking the 1800s, and as well as the early 20th century, so then we're talking about the early 1900s, especially around people like Aleister Crowley, Madame Blavatsky, Arthur Edward White, and Pamela Coleman Smith, and you guys should know some of those names because of the tarot. There was a huge explosion of spirituality and blending Eastern esotericism with Western philosophy. And there was this huge explosion of just like channels, channeling, divine information, philosophy, theosophy, all those things. I can go into a more in-depth video about tarot specifically and about Arthur Edward White or Aleister Crowley another time. But I don't really want to linger on it right now because I do want to talk specifically about channeling. So we're going to start talking about specific cases of channeling that honestly, I feel like if we couldn't make a channeling video without talking about them. So the first person that I want to talk about is Edgar Cayce. He is often considered the founder of New Age thought movements, the father of channeling, and that is because he is one of the first modern channelers that has been recorded, or like that became well known. Obviously, again, if people have been channeling for like a very long time, it's fair to say that people were still channeling before Edgar Cayce in the modern era, and by modern I mean post-industrial revolution, but for whatever reason it wasn't documented, and so his is like a documented case with hours of written and recorded evidence. And by evidence, I just mean like of his channeling sessions. Edgar Cayce was an American born in 1877, and he considered himself to be Christian, which already, if we're talking about channeling other entities that come into your body and talk through you, a lot of dogmatic religious belief systems, in particular Christianity, would call this demonic. So it's very interesting that he himself was a Christian. He became known as the sleeping prophet because when he was doing his channeling sessions, he would lay down in a sleeping position. So he would be laying down with his eyes closed, seemingly asleep, and then he would start channeling messages about healing, the afterlife, Atlantis, etc. And he would just talk. Now, how did his channeling come about? So keep in mind, this is a very quick rundown, but he lost his voice due to some medical condition that he had, and then he regained it during a hypnosis, as in he was trying to seek a lot of medical solutions, nothing was working. He found a hypnotist, tried that, boom, voice repaired, I guess. But he ended up becoming a channeler because of his hypnosis. And when he was channeling, his voice was like magically back. He eventually ended up working with other osteopaths and homeopaths as a medical clairvoyant because Edgar Cayce developed this really interesting ability to diagnose medical issues in his channeling state. In fact, he became so well known for this that in 1910, the New York Times printed an article about Edgar Cayce called "Illiterate Man Becomes a Doctor When Hypnotized." This is because Edgar Cayce had dropped out of school and he seemingly had the knowledge of a doctor while he was in a channeling state. In a channeling state, he was able to accurately describe the body and its conditions. And Edgar Cayce was channeling his higher self, by the way, or at least that's sort of been the consensus, because he didn't really feel like he was channeling another entity. Another important thing that I want to talk about, specifically dealing with Edgar Cayce, is that he spoke about reincarnation and astrology, but because he was Christian, he denied the veracity of those things, and he denied much of what was said in his channeling sessions, even though a lot of other people believed him in his altered state, but he did not agree with what was being said. From roughly 1900 to 1930, Cayce focused pretty much exclusively on medical messages using his higher self or this channeled entity to convey medical diagnoses, but then during the Depression, the topics shifted to more esoteric themes, basically because of the culture of the people at the time. Now, there is a lot of speculation as to whether Edgar Cayce was faking it, or whether his predictions were accurate. So you gotta take it all with a grain of salt and ultimately decide for yourself. But if we're talking about channeling, Edgar Cayce is like one of the first to channel in the modern era in a way that had been documented. I mean, the New York Times picked it up, so obviously it was a big deal. And this brings me to another modern channeler who's considered the mother of channeling, and this is Jane Roberts channeling Seth. In 1963, Jane Roberts was writing, and she ended up having a spiritual experience where she disassociated from reality and began writing notes that she titled The Physical Universe as Idea Construction. So this comes back to that automatic writing that we had talked about in the beginning of this video, which seems to be a very common way for people to end up channeling through writing. That is, I don't know, I thought that was really interesting, and as a writer myself, I publish books, I am an author, and I enjoy writing. I write all the time in my free time because I love telling stories. I don't know how to explain it, but a lot of authors, including myself, do kind of say that they don't write their stories. The stories write themselves. You know, you're just a witness watching the story and you record what you see. And honestly, that is exactly how I feel about my writing. I have a plan. The story doesn't always follow my plan. My characters don't always listen. And obviously that's really silly. But a lot of, if you're an author, you'll understand. You get it. If you love writing, if you write in your free time, even if you haven't published anything, you get it. I know you do. Because I hang out in these author spaces and I think I have not met a single author yet. Okay, not true. I've heard of a couple authors who don't have that, but it's very rare. Anyway, very interesting that it can sometimes lead to this automatic writing. Anyway, Jane Roberts and her husband ended up having discussions about this because she wrote this, like, journal entry, this, like, article for herself called The Physical Universe as Idea of Construction. She ended up deciding that she wanted to explore this. It was a really spiritual experience. She didn't understand it, but she was curious. So Roberts and her husband ended up using a Ouija board to communicate messages from an entity that called itself Seth. I find this very spooky. I don't even believe in Ouija boards. So can you imagine? Like, I don't even believe in Ouija boards. And, you know, at this point, I used to not believe in tarot. I know I've told you guys that before. I used to not believe it. I got a deck because I was like, that stuff doesn't work. Used the tarot and I was shocked by how well it worked. And this just seems to be a recurring theme in my life. So I'm waiting for Ouija boards to prove me wrong, but I haven't purchased one yet. You let me know what you think about that. It is kind of spooky though that the entity was able to communicate through Jane Roberts with the Ouija board. But perhaps that's what tarot does too. I don't know. Things to think about. Eventually, though, Roberts started to hear the messages in her head, and she was able to speak them aloud without the use of the Ouija board, and so she no longer had to use the Ouija board as a translation tool, and was able to enter a trance-like state, and channel Seth. Her husband wrote down notes about what was being channeled, and they kept a really well-documented compilation of Seth's material, which eventually gets titled The Seth Material. What's really interesting about this is that Jane Roberts did not believe in God or demons. In fact, she wrote to a psychologist asking for help because she thought that the Seth might just be an inner suppressed part of herself. And so she was asking a psychologist to help, like, diagnose this. She's like, look, I don't think I'm, like, totally crazy. Like, I can still live a normal life, but this is really weird, isn't it? And the psychologist didn't really offer her, I guess, what she was looking for. They didn't really have a good answer for it. And so eventually Jane Roberts just kind of accepted that Seth had to be this, like, subconscious part of herself and didn't really view it as a higher entity and therefore did not view it as demonic in any way. Now, over the years, Roberts did have many sessions that were some were recorded on video, some were just written down, and a lot of it was compiled into the Seth Material, which after my channeling experiences, the Seth Material was some of the first content that I, like, read, and I was like, this is the same thing. Like, this is the same message, and it was very validating for me because I could not explain what was happening. I could not explain the trance-like state. I could not explain why I was channeling, what even it was. I didn't have a name for it, and the Seth Material there was a lot of overlap with the messaging, and that honestly like shocked me, but it was very validating, and it helped me to kind of recognize that I wasn't totally insane, at least in my opinion. Okay, so let's talk about like present day channeling, and one of the most popular channelers that I have found is Daryl Anka. So Daryl Anka channels an entity called Bashar, who is an extraterrestrial being from a parallel reality. Bashar is purported to come from the planet Essassani and shares a lot of messages about extraterrestrials, about the nature of reality and life on this planet, etc. Actually, last night I just started Daryl Anka's new show on Gaia, which I'll put a screenshot up here because I don't remember what it's called, but I started watching that because I really wanted to see more of it. Daryl does host a lot of events, like live events, where he channels Bashar and people can ask questions, and there's a plenty of clips online about it. So I thought that was really interesting, and also his channelings and the messages that he has shared have also been very validating based on stuff that my channel state has said. So in the channeling state, Anka, and thus Bashar through Daryl, they cover themes of the nature of reality, time, ETs, and why following your passions is important. They talk about positivity, etc. There's kind of like a blend of like positive self-help encouragement type of topics and like physics-based explanations of what reality really is. And there are other channelers in the modern era. There are plenty of others out there. If you watch Gaia's channeling series, they show a bunch of different people who channel different entities. Some people channel like their oversoul or their higher selves. Some people channel extraterrestrials. Some channel like deities. It kind of depends. Some channel archangels. It's very dependent upon the channeler. And some people channel what they say are like egregores or like ideas of a deity, but it represents something to the person, and that's why it presents that way. So it's kind of like a blend of things. So let's talk about some arguments about channeling. The first thing is that it's not always accurate. So that is a huge argument, that it's not always accurate. Sometimes there are predictions that are made, and it just doesn't come true. There's also the whole idea that like different channels have different messages sometimes. Sometimes they conflict. It very much depends. But I would say that the reason it's different between each person is because when you're channeling, it's thought forms that are coming in. These are like coded messages, they're ideas, they are just pure thought, there are no words, and you as the channel have to become the translator. Instead of the tarot being the translator or the Ouija board being the translator, you become the translator. And so, depending on how you describe an image, that changes the conversation. Imagine if you were shown A Starry Night by Van Gogh, and you were shown this painting, and I asked you to describe it. You cannot show other people this image, you can only describe it. And then I have somebody else across the world, and I ask them to describe it. You guys are going to start describing different things. There will be some overlap, some similarities, but when you start describing how it makes you feel, or what you think might be happening in the painting, you're going to have a different idea in some ways. So I think channeling's like that. Like the main pieces overlap, but there's going to be some differentiation because it's two different people having two different perspectives trying to convey the same idea. To put this in another example, I like to bring it back to the New Testament when Jesus Christ is dying on the cross, because when you read it, his last words change depending on who's telling the story. And it's because while the disciples may have all witnessed the event, they have a different perspective and they remember different pieces. Different things stand out to them about that event. So the idea remains the same, but the execution, the way it's described, is different. And I think channeling is much like that. As for things not always being accurate, I want to bring this back to remote viewing, which is something that the CIA was studying for a while through their Gateway program. The CIA had studied psychic abilities, psychic spying, and remote viewing, and the results for them were above chance, or above guessing, so it was more accurate than just random chance or random guessing, but the results were more or less inconsistent, and it differed person to person. So remote viewing wasn't 100% accurate or repeatable, and I think that the channeling predictions are much the same. Also, if you hear my cat in the background, she just wants to come into this room, but she's not allowed. So if she's crying, she's a tortoiseshell, she just screams all the time. That is how she operates, and we're just gonna have to move past that. She's totally fine, I promise. Okay, so let's talk about how some people call channeling possession. So, for example, Christianity would likely forbid channeling because to them it could be seen as demonic possession. Additionally, other religions might say that it's wrong to channel messages or to use psychic abilities, mediumship, etc., unless you're specifically chosen by God, right? We also have gurus like Ashayana Diane, she's a spiritual leader and speaker who claims that you shouldn't channel information. There are people who talk about trickster deities and all of those things and spirits that mean you harm. So again, that stuff, I'm not even going to tell you what to believe on it. I'm just going to let you know that it's out there. You kind of have to use your own discernment and decide for yourself whether you think it's a good thing or not. It depends on your own belief system, and it depends on if you are channeling, what are you channeling, and how does it make you feel in the end. Another thing I do want to point out is that there are bad actors in the channeling spheres. Like, there are people out there who claim to channel who probably don't, who may be doing it for clout. There are people who may be channeling and their message just doesn't resonate, or there's too many conflicting messages. Again, you gotta use your own discernment there. I have seen tons and tons and tons of channelers online. I've listened to them, and sometimes I'm like, I don't think that's true. For me, the way that I kind of vet my channelers that I listen to is I essentially compare them. I compare the messages. I don't really compare the channeler, but the message. I compare all the messages and I look to see what seems to span across all channels. Reincarnation is one topic that seems to span across all of them. So I'm like, okay, if we're talking about reincarnation, I guess reincarnation is real. So that's one way that I kind of like vet it. But you're going to have to find your own system for that. I wish that there was a better way around it, but like I've said before, and people got so mad when I mentioned this in a video, but spirituality, religion, belief, myth, whatever you end up creating for your belief system, you have to decide for yourself. Some things can be scientifically proven, but not everything. There is a lot that cannot be scientifically proven, and that is why it's in the realm of spirituality and philosophy. You have to decide for yourself. Which brings me to the fact that channeling cannot be totally scientifically proven. Now, I will say Daryl Anka in his movie did show that his brain waves change, that his brain changes. It was in his documentary First Contact, but he showed that through a brain scan that it does change when he channels Bashar. But the problem is there's not enough repeatable evidence-based proof that this happens to other channels. I don't know if other channels have gone through brain scans. I know I haven't. So, there's not enough repeatable evidence in order for us to come to any grand conclusion on whether it can be scientifically proven. So again, you're gonna have to take it all with a grain of salt, but I think one thing somebody told me once was that it's the message that's important, so just listen to the message and then decide for yourself. Again, we're in the realm of philosophy. Maybe one day we'll have more evidence proving that channeling works. Maybe there's some other CIA document that'll be published that will talk about it. I don't know. But for now, we have remote viewing. We have that document. So to wrap up my little talk on channeling, I just wanted to cover a couple things that I think about with it. So first of all, I believe in it. I used to not. I really didn't. The first person I ever saw channeling was Sheila Gillette, and it was on the George Norrie show on Gaia, and I saw it and I was like, I do not believe that. So sorry, Sheila Gillette. But I was a disbeliever. I was like, nope, I don't believe that. And then it happened to me. And it happened to me in the craziest, kind of scariest way that one could imagine. It was pretty insane, but since then I have developed my spirituality a lot more. I have practiced meditation a lot more. And I do believe in channeling now, and I used to not, which is crazy. I honestly probably wouldn't even be making this video or any videos about spirituality or even consistent videos about tarot if it hadn't happened to me. This has really changed me and my spiritual journey and things that I want to do in life, and it kind of brought me back to who I was when I was young, back when I was studying religion like crazy, and it was something that I really cared about because I kind of fell away from all that, and so it kind of brought me back. But I wouldn't even be here right now talking to you about this if it hadn't happened to me. I do think that it's interesting that we can't really prove anything yet, and I do stand by that, but there are a lot of things we can prove, and slowly as quantum physicists and people who are studying consciousness explore consciousness as they talk about reality and the nature of reality, I think these channeled messages are becoming, they're basically sort of getting proven in a way. Obviously not everything. Obviously not everything's getting proven, but reincarnation is something that people are talking about, especially when we think about like weird habits that get passed down through the generations that just stay and that are not learned, or how we have the observer effect and we have the double slit experiment that kind of prove that, you know, our perception of reality shapes reality, our thoughts shape reality. So we're getting all of these experiments, all of these consciousness scientists who are really diving into like the science behind the spiritual nature of this stuff, but it's stuff that's been talked about by religions, by channelers for a very, very long time. The last thing I want to walk away with here is that I heard recently somebody had said that firsthand experience may be the only path towards belief and acceptance. Firsthand experience. That's why it's important to advocate for people to meditate, advocate to seek out a spiritual understanding in some ways, but ultimately, firsthand experience is going to be what, I don't want to say converts you, that sounds bad, but like what maybe convinces you, maybe opens up your mind. It did for me. I needed the firsthand experience. Like I said, I would not be making this video if I didn't have the firsthand experience myself. And I did, and it made me more open to the concept, and now I'm studying consciousness, I'm studying the nature of reality, I'm studying other channels and esoteric works that I never would have touched. So I definitely highly, 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 highly recommend trying to experience it for yourself in some way, whether you need to do deep states of meditation, whether you need to see a hypnotist, or maybe you want to listen to other channelers, or you try the gateway process that the CIA obviously was studying with the remote viewing and stuff. Maybe you need to explore that. I don't know. So anyway, that is all I have for you guys today. So thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.